Here's how to remake 90210 on FL Studio. Now, before getting into this, it's obviously got two different beats. I'm just going to split the video up into those two sections. First beat is in 129 BPM, second beat is in 81, and the key throughout is A minor. Now, starting off with beat 1, you've got a pluck, chord stabs, and a bass that basically runs through the whole track. The chord stabs, I found the identical preset. This is on the Juno 106, and it's the KY polychorus. This is pretty much exact, so you can listen and you can hear that it's identical. Then moving on to the bass, I used a BWB bass, just a short one. It's pretty accurate. Obviously it's probably not the real one, but it's very close to say that. And then finally for the pluck, I searched for ages through the Juno 106, which is where it's believed to be. Could not find anything. I found a lot of things close when I altered the frequencies, but the best thing I could find was the Forbidden Planet preset, which is pretty close. It's just missing that twangy feeling, but I couldn't really get it. It's probably to do with the mixing, or it's just a different preset entirely that I just couldn't find. And yeah, once you get these notes in on screen, it's a pretty simple melody. This is how this first bit should sound. And then after that first bit, they drop out and then a bass comes in. The notes are pretty simple on this, and I just found an Analog Lab preset that's very similar to the original, but it's just kind of like a low pass bass. The notes slide between each other and it sounds like this. And then the stabs, the pluck and the bass come back in again. And then it moves on to a different section with a dark bass and then also a lead. This bass is very, very low. I couldn't find the exact preset, but this one again is very similar. And then I found the exact preset for this dark kind of swooping lead that comes in and out. And yeah, them two together sound like this. And then finally, for the melodies for this first beat, there is a guitar and a power chord. They kind of replicate each other in the melodies, but the actual guitar lead kind of cuts through a little bit more. I found, again, very similar presets on the JV 1080. And yeah, they sound like this. And then the last thing for the first beat is the actual drum pattern itself. It's got a hi-hat, a snare, a kick, and then a vox. The snare is the identical snare used. The kick is similar, I don't think it's identical. And then the hi-hat I think is actually pretty bang on. I used a Ronnie hi-hat. You can kind of hear it ticking in the background. It's very low. And also that is followed by the effect for the hi-hat, which is kind of just like this little riser that plays at the end of the drum beat. And then for the vox, it's the standard chant. And then it's also laid with this kind of hey vox, but I don't know if I got the exact sound for that. It sounds similar, but something's off with the tone, but probably just to do with the mixing. But yeah, here's what this drum beat sounds like. Now that's everything for beat 1. I'll play the whole beat at the end as well and go through the mixing beforehand. But yeah, when you move on to beat 2, obviously you need to make a tempo automation to take it down to 81. And then you need to make note of two samples you'll be needing. One is the piano sample and one is a kind of drum perk sample in the background. I've got both of these in the FLP, so you can just grab them. But firstly we'll work on the bass. Now the bass, from what I'm gathering, was actually a live bass, so I couldn't get the exact sound or really the exact mix of it. That's probably what was furthest off in this second half remake. But essentially I just went on Analog Lab and found a couple live bass presets and just went through them and found the closest. But yeah, put these notes in and this is what the bass will sound like. And then at the same time you got a guitar playing. Now I actually feel like I got a pretty identical preset for this guitar. I went on Xenology and looked through a lot of distorted guitars and I found this one. Put these notes in, you'll get this. And then moving on to the hardest bit of this probably whole remake was this piano. Now this piano was replayed live, I think. It doesn't actually use the sample, but I think they just used it to interpolate and replay live. So it's actually quite hard to get this piano sound correct, but I basically went on Earth Piano, looked through a lot of different sounds, and I came with this one that I was pretty happy with. And then I also laid in the original sample to try and get that vintage feel, because I don't really have that many effect plugins to kind of replicate that sound that they've got. I think I got pretty close, but yeah, this is what it sounds like. And then the final melody for the second half of the beat is like a choir. Now again, I couldn't find the exact preset for this choir, and I knew exactly how I wanted it to sound, but I just did not have the VST to replicate it. So I went with a contact bank that I've got. That's actually a live choir, but it doesn't actually have the same kind of cadence that the other one has. But yeah, it worked. Now finally for the second beat, it's all about that drum pattern. It all starts off with a hi-hat and a clap that just kind of ticks over at the start of the beat. And laid within that clap pattern is also another kind of reverbed clap that I've put in that you can hear in the actual original beat. And also the claps seem to change pitch in the first part of the beat, but then it doesn't happen in the second. At least that's what I could hear. I could be tripping, but yeah, this is what they sound like. And then you've got a kick and a snare that actually comes in after. This is the identical kick and snare. It's the kick used in Antidote, which is obviously from the same album and uses the same producers. And then you've also got the live snare that they've used. Because it seems like some aspects of this drum pattern were replayed live, kind of interpolated from that sample again, but you also use that sample in the background because that hi-hat sound you hear is, well, a different hi-hat I put in, and then also the sampled one kind of ticking over, and they create this quite unique bounce. The only issue I had with this remake mainly was getting everything in time. It seems like the second half could be like not in 81 BPM, like 81.2 something, but I didn't really experiment with it fully. I just kind of try to make it work. But there are some points in the beat where it slightly goes off time, even though the vocals don't. So I don't really know what's gone on there. But it might just be because they didn't quantize the full drum bounce. But yeah, essentially, once you've got that drum beat in, it should sound like this. And then finally, to end this remake off, I want to go back to the mixing and mastering. I don't have that many effects, which is what kind of restrains me in a lot of these remakes, but I've essentially gone through a lot of things to try and get the mix kind of sounding right. I was happy with the mix in the first half of the beat. I used a couple EQs, a bit of reverb, just the standard stuff really. But then the second half of the beat, I couldn't really quite get it to mesh. Mainly the piano and the bass weren't really kind of ticking together, but I feel like I got the drum mix quite spot on, to be fair. But yeah, I'm just going through it now. Here's a lot of different things that I've used on the mixer channel. But yeah, that should be the full remake. This is definitely the most accurate one you'll see on YouTube by far. I've got a good amount of the identical presets in here. And yeah, thanks for watching. The FLP is in the description for free. Here's the full beat.